Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into a real-world biological thriller that is honestly way scarier than any sci-fi movie. We're talking about the endlessly fascinating, super creepy world of parasitic fungi. And no, not your typical mushrooms. We are talking about microscopic invaders that completely override the behavior of complex insects, literally turning them into unwilling zombies just to reproduce.
Just imagine for a second, what if a parasite could hijack your brain, dictate your movements, and completely control your body, all while keeping you alive just long enough to serve its own purpose? It sounds like a terrifying what if, right? But for millions of insects foraging in forests right now, this visceral nightmare is a daily reality. By the end of this explainer, you're going to understand exactly how these microscopic puppet masters pull off one of the greatest heists in the natural world.
Act 1. The Invasion.
All right, let's meet our primary suspect, the infamous zombie ant fungus. Here we have a carpenter ant permanently locked onto a plant vein in what researchers call the death grip. And notice that long, pale stalk erupting straight out of the back of its head? Yeah, that is the fruiting body of the Ophiocordyceps fungus. It grows right out of the ant's corpse to rain infectious spores down onto the forest floor below, targeting the ant's nestmates. The stakes here literally couldn't be higher.
So how exactly does an ant go from a perfectly healthy forager to, well, that? It's a pretty terrifying timeline. It starts simply enough when a healthy ant encounters fungal spores outside the nest. Fast forward 1 to 2 weeks, and the ant's behavior radically changes. It gets hyperactive, it starts shaking, then it begins summiting, climbing up vegetation to a specific height where the temperature and humidity are just absolutely perfect for the fungus. Then comes the final step, the death grip, where the ant bites down permanently. And only after the ant is safely anchored and dead does the fungus sprout its fruiting body.
And what's absolutely wild here is the timing. Carpenter ants naturally follow really strict day and night rhythms, normally foraging at night and resting during the day. But this infection just totally breaks that clock. The ants become constantly active, day and night. Yet, when it's time for that final summoning climb, it happens almost perfectly synchronized to solar noon. Researchers figured out that the fungus actually uses its own circadian clock genes, including specific photoreceptors, to override the ant's biological clock. It's hijacking the ant's internal rhythms for its own spore-spreading agenda.
Act 2. Takeover mechanics.
Okay, so how does a fungus actually force an ant's jaw to lock shut forever? Well, the death grip isn't a voluntary bite. It's a forced hypercontraction. It happens in 4 main steps. First, the fungus forms dense networks that completely surround the ant's jaw muscles. Second, it damages the protective membrane of the muscle cells. Third, because that membrane keeps ionic balance, the damage causes a massive flood of calcium into the muscle. And finally, that calcium flood acts like a short-circuited electrical system, causing the jaw muscles to violently hypercontract and lock up permanently. No way out.
When you zoom in with an electron microscope, the horror really becomes clear. These are literal fungal tubes physically invading the ant's jaw. Look at how the fungal cells crowd that intermuscular space, directly penetrating and pushing the muscle fibers apart. By the time of the death grip, the invading fungus makes up roughly 40% of the host's entire biomass. It's an absolute microscopic takeover.
But honestly, here is the absolute creepiest twist. Despite all this physical destruction of the muscle tissue, researchers found that the central nervous system, the ant's brain and motor neurons, actually appear physically intact at the exact moment of the death grip. The fungus acts locally on the muscles, like a puppeteer pulling strings, leaving the host's brain physically unharmed while stripping away all its control.
So how exactly does it pull off this puppetry without destroying the nerves? Well, it uses a highly bespoke chemical arsenal. Right at the moment of biting, the fungus boosts its production of specific toxins by a staggering 3,000-fold. It also produces ergot alkaloids, which are compounds known to alter serotonin and cause severe hallucinations and convulsions in mammals. It pumps this totally custom toxic cocktail right into the ant's system to force that fatal bite.
Act 3. The Specialist.
Now, you might be wondering, if this fungus is that powerful, why isn't it zombifying every insect in the forest? To figure that out, scientists took these fungi into the lab to test the strict limits of its mind control powers. They injected the fungus directly into several different, closely related species of carpenter ants, basically bypassing the outer armor to give the fungus direct access inside their bodies.
And the crucial takeaway here is this. The lab experiments showed the fungus could successfully infect and kill all the ant species it was injected into. It's a lethal killer, for sure,
But it could only induce that complex twig-biting manipulation behavior in the specific host species it naturally infects in the wild. The non-target ants simply die to the infection without ever climbing or biting.
Why is that? Because the fungus literally senses whose brain it's touching. Researchers actually grew the fungus in a petri dish right alongside the brains of different ant species. And they discovered the fungus secretes a completely different array of chemicals depending on which species' brain it's near. When it's next to its proper host, it releases specific compounds like guanobutyric acid and sphingosine. It acts as a perfect biological lock-and-key mechanism. The mind control cocktail is custom brewed for one specific brain.
Act 4, the extended universe.
Now, ants aren't the only ones dealing with mind-controlling parasites. Take a look at the fly snatcher fungus, which targets fruit flies. Much like the zombie ants, infected flies are forced to summit and assume a very specific pose, perfect for spore dispersal. But this fungus takes a totally different route to the brain. Researchers found that fungal cells disproportionately congregate around a specific neurosecretory region of the fly's brain called the pars center cerebralis. The fungus basically sits right next to the fly's neural communication infrastructure, perfectly placed to tap in and manipulate behavior.
And then there's Massospora. This one is truly the stuff of nightmares. It targets cicadas. Notice how the back of the cicada's abdomen has been completely replaced by this massive, chalky fungal plug? And yet, the cicada is still alive, still flying around, and acting completely unbothered.
This is a great comparison of their macabre strategies. On one side, you have this stealthy ant fungus. It's a patient assassin. It waits until the ant is dead and firmly anchored before it ever reveals itself and sprouts its spores. On the other side, you have the gruesome Massospora. It rips open a cicada's abdomen and replaces it with a spore-shedding plug while the host is still super active. Why? Because an active cicada buzzing around interacting with others is basically a flying salt shaker of spores, maximizing the spread of infection.
Act 5, the twist.
So, why do scientists obsess over these creepy interactions? Well, it turns out these fungi are basically an untapped pharmacy of the forest. I mean, historically, fungal-derived metabolites have given us crucial drugs like antibiotics and immunosuppressants. By studying how this fungus brews a custom chemical cocktail for a specific ant species, we could develop highly targeted, species-specific pesticides that kill pests without harming beneficial insects like bees. Plus, the compounds that cause the ant jaw to lock so firmly, they could inspire superpowered natural adhesives. And the unique molecules these fungi use to interact with insect brains are already inspiring new avenues in neurotropic drug discovery and even cancer research.
It's a pretty incredible thought, right? We started out looking at what seemed like a biological horror story, a total nightmare of hijacked brains and lost control. But by decoding the complex molecular dialogue between these fungal puppeteers and their hosts, scientists are unlocking entirely new natural products. Could the very fungi that turn insects into zombies actually hold the key to our next great medical breakthrough? It definitely leaves you looking at these parasites not just with fear, but with immense awe. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep staying curious about the bizarre and beautiful natural world around us.